The treaty's price. The crystalline spires of the galactic conclave stretched toward the artificial sky of Station Harmony, their surfaces reflecting the simulated sunlight in prismatic patterns. Sarah Chen stood at the observation window, her diplomatic uniform crisp, despite the 18-hour negotiation session she'd just endured. The past 3 years of war between humanity and the Nexarian Empire had left both civilizations bleeding, and now everything hinged on today's peace treaty signing. Director Chen. The voice behind her belonged to Admiral Marcus Hayes. The Nexarian delegation has arrived. Sarah turned, her dark eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. And High Sovereign Karen. As imperious as ever, she's demanding a final review of the treaty terms. Sarah suppressed a sigh. The Nexarian leader's reputation for perfectionism was legendary. Karen had ascended to power through their empire's brutal meritocracy, proving herself both a brilliant tactician and an uncompromising ruler. Her silver-scaled skin and towering height marked her as pure-blooded Nexarian royalty, but it was her penetrating violet eyes that most found unsettling. The main chamber of the conclave buzzed with tension as Sarah entered. Karen stood at the center, her ceremonial armor catching the light. The High Sovereign's personal guard, sleek, cybernetically enhanced warriors, formed a protective circle around her. Director Chen. Karen's voice carried the distinctive harmonic overtones of her species. Your species' insistence on rushing this process is typical of your short-lived perspective. Sarah met the alien ruler's gaze steadily. With respect, High Sovereign, both our peoples are dying. Every day we delay costs more lives. Karen's facial scales shifted in what Sarah had learned to recognize as contemplation. Then let us examine this treaty one final time. The next hour passed in meticulous review. The terms were complex. Trade agreements, territorial concessions, technological exchanges. But it was the final page that changed everything. Sarah felt her blood freeze as she read the clause she'd somehow missed in all previous reviews. The universal translator must have glitched, she thought. But no, the words remained unchanged. In accordance with ancient Nexarian law and the human custom of personal sovereignty, the High Sovereign Karen shall be bound in service to Human Directory Representative Sarah Chen as guarantee of peace between their peoples. This is impossible, Sarah breathed. This can't be right. Karen's violet eyes blazed. You claim ignorance of this clause, human. I had no knowledge of this. Sarah's mind raced. This must be a mistake in the translation. Or, there is no mistake. The new voice belonged to Valen, Karen's chief diplomat. This clause was inserted by our own legal scholars. By our most ancient laws, peace between powers must be sealed with a bond of service. Your negotiators agreed to all terms. Sarah looked at Admiral Hayes, who appeared equally shocked. We never intended. Intention is irrelevant, Karen cut in. Her voice was deadly quiet. The treaty is binding. If you reject this clause, you reject the entire peace. The chamber fell silent. Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. If she refused, the war would continue. Millions more would die. But to accept meant taking responsibility for the leader of an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. High Sovereign, Sarah said carefully, I cannot and will not treat you as a servant. Whatever this clause demands legally, I propose we treat it as a diplomatic formality only. Karen's laugh was like breaking glass. How noble. You think you can simply ignore our traditions. The bond of service is sacred to my people. It cannot be dismissed as mere ceremony. Then help me understand, Sarah replied. Help me honor your traditions without dishonoring your position. For a long moment, Karen studied her. The High Sovereign's guard shifted uneasily, hands on their weapons. Finally, Karen spoke. You are either very clever or very foolish. Director Chen, perhaps both. But the clause stands. I will uphold my people's laws, even as they bind me to you. The question is, will you uphold your end of this burden? Sarah straightened her spine. I will do whatever is necessary for peace. Then let us proceed with the signing. But know this, human, you may hold my bond, but you do not hold my loyalty. That must be earned. As Sarah stepped forward to sign, she caught a glimpse of something in Karen's expression. Not just anger or resignation, but curiosity. The High Sovereign was testing her, she realized. This clause wasn't just about ancient laws or peace treaties. It was about understanding what humans would do with power over those who had once been their enemies. The treaty was signed in silence, its terms reverberating across two civilizations. As Sarah looked up from the document, she met Karen's gaze and knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenge would be transforming this forced arrangement into something that could truly bring peace. Well, High Sovereign, Sarah said quietly, it seems we have much to learn about each other. Karen's scales shifted in what might have been amusement. Indeed, Director Chen. Indeed we do. Pride and protocol. The human embassy on Station Harmony had not been designed to accommodate a Nexarian High Sovereign and her elite guard. Sarah Chen watched as Karen ducked through another doorway, the alien ruler's expression growing stonier with each cramped passage. I could arrange quarters in the station's diplomatic wing, Sarah offered, keeping her voice neutral. 3 days had passed since the treaty signing, and every interaction felt like navigating a minefield. No, Karen's response was clipped. The bond requires proximity to the holder. I will adapt. The words bondholder carried a weight that made Sarah uncomfortable. She'd spent the last 72 hours studying Nexarian cultural archives, trying to understand exactly what this arrangement meant. The more she learned, the more complex it became. High Sovereign, Sarah began. Protocol dictates you may use my name, Karen interrupted. As holder of my bond, such formality is unnecessary. Then please, use mine as well. Karen's violet eyes narrowed. You continue to treat this as a partnership of equals. It is not. Before Sarah could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights pulsed along the corridors. Karen's guard snapped to attention, weapons materializing from beneath their armor. Sarah's comm unit crackled. Director Chen. Multiple explosions in the station's diplomatic quarter. We have confirmed casualties. Karen moved with liquid grace, already heading for the door. Your security forces are inadequate. My guard will. Wait. Sarah's command cut through the chaos. To her surprise, Karen actually stopped, though the High Sovereign's scales rippled with barely contained energy. If this is an attack on the peace process, we need to be strategic. You would have me hide while others fight. I would have you help me end this without more bloodshed. Sarah activated her tactical display, projecting a holographic map of the station. Your guards are elite warriors, yes, but they're also clearly Nexarian. If they engage, it could be seen as an act of aggression. Karen studied the map, her expression unreadable. You believe this is meant to provoke renewed conflict, don't you? A series of fresh explosions rocked the station. Sarah's comm buzzed again. Director, hostiles are heading for the embassy level. Sarah looked at Karen. I need to know, will you trust me? Trust. Karen's laugh held no humor. You humans and your obsession with trust. I am bound to you by law and tradition. Is that not enough? No, Sarah replied firmly. Not for this. Something shifted in Karen's gaze. What do you propose? Sarah quickly outlined her plan. As she spoke, Karen's expression changed from skepticism to grudging interest. When Sarah finished, the High Sovereign was silent for a long moment. It is unconventional, Karen finally said. My military advisors would call it madness. Will it work? Perhaps, if your species can match my people's discipline. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Then let's find out. The next hour was chaos. As the attackers, a mix of human and Nexarian extremists, fought their way toward the embassy, they found themselves caught in an elaborate trap. Karen's guards, their armor modified to appear as human security forces, herded the terrorists into prepared containment zones. Meanwhile, human tactical teams wearing salvaged Nexarian combat suits created the illusion of a much larger Nexarian presence. The confusion and misdirection worked. Unable to tell friend from foe, the attackers' coordination crumbled. When Sarah finally gave the signal, both human and Nexarian forces struck simultaneously. The battle was over in minutes. In the aftermath, Sarah found Karen standing among the captured terrorists, her presence radiating authority despite her lack of ceremonial armor. Your plan succeeded, Karen acknowledged, though it relied heavily on deception. Sometimes the appearance of division can forge unity, Sarah replied. These extremists wanted to prove that our peoples can't work together. We proved them wrong. Karen's scales shifted in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. You are not what I expected, Sarah Chen. Is that a good thing? It is. Karen seemed to search for the right word. Interesting. Your species' reputation for unpredictability is well earned. Yet there is wisdom in your chaos. Before Sarah could respond, her comm unit chimed. The preliminary investigation had identified the attack's leaders. Among them were several high-ranking officials from both governments. This goes deeper than we thought, Sarah murmured. Yes. Karen's voice hardened. And now we must decide how to proceed. Will you command me to take action against my own people? Sarah met the High Sovereign's gaze. No. But I will ask for your help in finding the truth, whatever it costs us both. Karen studied her for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's surprise, the High Sovereign inclined her head, not the bow of a servant, but the acknowledgement of a worthy ally. Then let us hunt, Sarah Chen, together. As they began planning their next move, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The bond of service still existed, but alongside it grew something new, a partnership forged in crisis, tempered by respect, and sustained by a shared purpose. Common ground. The wreckage of the Nexarian cruiser drifted against the backdrop of stars, its once pristine hull now scarred and broken. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human vessel Concordia, watching as search teams combed through the debris field. Beside her, Karen's scales had taken on the dull sheen of barely contained rage. 87 crew members, Karen said, her harmonic voice tight with emotion. All dead. And for what? Because they were loyal to you, Sarah replied softly. The manifest shows they were carrying evidence about the conspiracy within your government. 2 weeks had passed since the attack on Station Harmony. Their investigation had revealed a web of corruption spanning both civilizations, military officers, politicians, and corporate interests who had profited from the war and now sought to reignite it. The missiles that destroyed this ship, Karen's violet eyes narrowed. They were of human design. Yes, and the targeting data came from Nexarian military channels. Sarah turned to face the High Sovereign. They're working together, Karen. Our enemies have found common ground. Why can't we? Karen's guard shifted uneasily at their posts. Since the attack, they'd adapted to working alongside human security teams, but tension remained. The High Sovereign herself had changed subtly, her initial resentment of the bond giving way to a wary pragmatism. You speak of common ground, Karen said, yet my people die while we debate. The old ways would have us answer blood with blood and start the war again. That's exactly what they want. Before Karen could respond, the ship's eye chimed. Director Chen, High Sovereign, we've detected an anomaly in the debris field. There's a survivor. The rescue operation was delicate. The surviving crew member, a young Nexarian analyst named Tellar, had sealed himself in a stasis pod moments before the ship's destruction. When they finally revived him in the Concordia's medical bay, his first action was to fall to his knees before Karen. My sovereign, Tellar gasped. The data. I preserved it. The conspirators. They're planning something. Something worse than war. Karen's scales rippled with intensity. Speak. The analyst's revelations were worse than they'd imagined. The conspirators weren't just trying to restart the war. They were planning to escalate it to unprecedented levels. They had discovered an ancient weapon buried in the heart of a dead star system. A weapon that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics within a localized space. They call it the Void Cascade, Tellar explained, his voice trembling. It could tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. They plan to blame its use on the opposing side, ensure that the war cannot end until one species is completely destroyed. Sarah felt her blood run cold. When? 3 days. The weapon is already being moved to its target. Tellar looked between Sarah and Karen. They chose Earth's sun. The medical bay fell silent. Sarah watched Karen carefully, seeing the conflict play across the High Sovereign's features. This was the moment that would define their relationship, and possibly the fate of both their species. By our ancient laws, Karen said finally, I am bound to obey your command in this matter. Sarah Chen. What would you have me do? Sarah straightened her spine. I would have you do what you believe is right, not as my bound servant, but as the leader your people need. Karen's scales shifted in surprise. Then, slowly, a new expression emerged, one that Sarah had never seen before. Respect. Then let me tell you what I believe, Karen said. I believe that both our peoples face extinction if we fail. I believe that our strength lies not in our differences, but in what we share, the will to survive, to protect our own. And I believe. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully, that perhaps the bond between us was not a curse, but an opportunity. Sarah felt a smile tug at her lips. To find common ground. To forge something new. Karen's violet eyes blazed with determination. These conspirators believe they can use our divisions against us. Let us show them the error of their judgment. Over the next hour, they formulated their plan. It was audacious, arguably insane, and would require perfect coordination between human and Nexarian forces. But as Sarah watched Karen rally her guards and coordinate with human tactical teams, she realized something had fundamentally changed. The High Sovereign no longer moved like a caged predator. Instead, she carried herself with a new purpose, not the isolated pride of an emperor, but the focused determination of a leader who had found allies rather than servants. You realize, Sarah said as they finished their preparations, that if we fail, both our worlds could be lost. Karen's response carried the weight of centuries of Nexarian tradition, yet held something uniquely human in its conviction. Then we shall not fail, Sarah Chen. Together. As the Concordia set course for Earth's solar system, Sarah looked at their combined forces, human and Nexarian working side by side, united against a common threat. Perhaps this was what both their peoples had needed all along, not victory or submission, but the discovery that their greatest strength lay in their ability to change, to adapt, to find common ground in the face of annihilation. The real battle was about to begin. The enemy within. The solar observatory on Mercury's dark side had been abandoned for decades, or so the official records claimed. As the joint human-Nexarian strike team approached in stealth shuttles, Sarah Chen studied the facility's heat signature on her tactical display. It was anything but abandoned. Multiple power signatures, she murmured. They've been busy. Karen stood beside her, the High Sovereign's combat armor gleaming dully in the shuttle's low light. The weapon? Deep inside, they're using the observatory's shielding to mask its energy output. Sarah looked up at her unlikely ally, having second thoughts about assaulting a heavily fortified position alongside humans to prevent the destruction of your solar system. Karen's scales rippled with what Sarah now recognized as dark humor, merely reflecting on how quickly the universe can change. 2 days had passed since Tellar's revelation about the Void Cascade weapon. They'd tracked the conspirators to this facility, but time was running out. In less than 12 hours, the weapon would be ready to deploy. Team 2 in position. Admiral Hayes' voice crackled over the comm. The veteran commander led the human contingent, while Karen's most trusted general, Valthur, commanded the Nexarian forces. Remember, Sarah broadcast to all teams, we only get one shot at this, if they realize we're coming. A sudden explosion rocked their shuttle. Alarms blared as emergency lights flooded the cabin with red. Through the viewport, Sarah watched in horror as one of the other shuttles erupted into flames. We've been betrayed. Karen's voice cut through the chaos. Evasive action. More explosions followed as hidden defense turrets emerged from the observatory's surface. But the pattern of fire was too precise, too coordinated. Someone had known exactly where they would be. All teams, scatter and regroup at fallback positions, Sarah ordered, but static answered her transmission. Their communications were being jammed. The shuttle pilot, a veteran of the war, managed to put them down behind a ridge of impact-scarred rock. As they evacuated the damaged craft, Sarah's tactical display showed their forces scattered across Mercury's barren surface, under heavy fire from the observatory's defenses. We have to abort. Admiral Hayes' voice finally broke through the interference. They knew we were coming. Half our forces are pinned down or destroyed. No. Karen's response was immediate. If we retreat, Earth burns. And after that, my worlds will follow. Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind racing. The betrayal had to come from someone high-ranking, someone who knew all the details of our assault plan. But whoa! Karen stopped suddenly, her scales paling. Valthur. As if summoned by his name, a new transmission cut through their comms. Indeed, my former sovereign. Valthur's voice dripped with contempt. Did you think I would allow our empire to be bound to these primitive humans? The void cascade will cleanse this system, and from its ashes, we will rebuild. Stronger, pure. You fool, Karen snarled. You would doom both our peoples for your pride. I would save us from weakness, from compromise, from leaders who would kneel before lesser beings. Sarah watched Karen closely, seeing the fury and pain warring in the High Sovereign's expression. Valthur had been more than a general. He had been a mentor, a trusted advisor for centuries. Karen, Sarah said softly, what do you need? The High Sovereign turned to her, violet eyes blazing. I need you to trust me, Sarah Chen. Completely. You have it. What followed was either brilliant strategy or complete madness, perhaps both. While the remaining human forces launched a frontal assault on the observatory's defenses, Karen and Sarah led a small team through maintenance tunnels that the High Sovereign herself had helped design centuries ago, when the facility had been a joint research station. They emerged into the observatory's core just as Valthur was preparing to activate the void cascade. The weapon itself was beautiful in its horror, a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around it, distorting reality itself. Ah, the bound queen arrives, Valthur sneered, surrounded by loyal guards. Come to watch your new master's world burn. No. Karen's voice was deadly calm. I come as High Sovereign of the Nexarian Empire, to pass judgment on a traitor. You lost the right to judge when you submitted to human authority. Did I? Karen glanced at Sarah. Tell me, Sarah Chen, as holder of my bond, do you command me to stand down? Sarah met her gaze steadily. I command you to be who you are, Karen. Nothing more, nothing less. What happened next would be debated in military academies for generations. Karen moved with impossible speed, her combat augments pushing past safety limits. Valthur's guards were elite warriors, but they had never faced their High Sovereign in true combat. Few had ever seen why the Empire's deadliest warrior wore the crown. Sarah and her team engaged the human conspirators, their coordinated tactics complementing Karen's lethal grace. In the chaos, Valthur lunged for the weapon's control matrix, but Karen was faster. The two Nexarians clashed in a blur of motion, centuries of martial knowledge unleashed in seconds. But Valthur had forgotten something crucial. Karen had not submitted to humans out of weakness, but out of strength. The strength to change, to adapt, to see beyond ancient hatreds. The battle ended with Valthur pinned against the weapon's housing, Karen's blade at his throat. "The Empire is changing," she told her former mentor. "With or without you." As human and Nexarian reinforcements secured the facility and contained the weapon, Sarah found Karen standing alone, watching Mercury's slow rotation through the observatory's main viewport. "You could have killed him," Sarah observed. "Yes. Why didn't you?" Karen's scales shifted thoughtfully. "Perhaps I am learning something from humans after all. The strength in mercy, in choosing a harder path than simple destruction." Sarah smiled slightly. "Does this mean you're finally accepting our partnership?" "Partnership?" Karen turned to her, violet eyes glinting. "I remain bound to you by ancient law, Sarah Chen. But perhaps that bond has become something more than either of us expected." As they stood together, watching the stars wheel above Mercury's scarred surface, both leaders knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead, not in fighting enemies, but in building something new from the ashes of the old. The conspiracy had been broken, but its roots ran deep. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges. But for now, they had found something rare and precious: trust forged in fire, strength in unity, and hope in change. 2 crowns. The great hall of the Nexarian Imperial Palace soared above Sarah Chen's head, its crystalline walls refracting starlight in mesmerizing patterns. 3 months had passed since the battle at Mercury, and now she stood before the assembled might of the Empire, the first human ever to do so. The aftermath of Valthur's failed conspiracy had shaken both civilizations. Dozens of officials on both sides had been implicated, and the cleanup had been painful. But something unexpected had emerged from the chaos: hope. "The Human Directory's representative approaches the throne of stars," announced the Imperial Herald, his harmonic voice echoing through the vast chamber. Karen sat upon the ancient throne, her ceremonial armor catching the light of 1,000 stars visible through the hall's transparent dome. But she wore something new as well: a small emblem that combined human and Nexarian symbols, marking the unique bond between them. "Rise, Sarah Chen." Karen's voice carried authority, but also something warmer. "You stand before the Empire not as a bondholder today, but as something unprecedented in our history." The assembled nobles murmured. Many had opposed this ceremony, seeing it as a final degradation of their traditions. But they had seen their high sovereign fight alongside humans, had witnessed the strength that came from unity rather than division. 3 months ago, Karen continued, our people stood on the brink of annihilation. Not from war alone, but from those who would use our differences to destroy us both. We survived because we dared to change, to trust, to forge new paths. Sarah stood straight, feeling the weight of history in this moment. She wore a diplomatic uniform modified with Nexarian elements, a visible symbol of their growing partnership. "The bond between us remains," Karen declared, "but it has transformed. No longer is it a chain of servitude, but a bridge between our peoples. Today we formalize this transformation." From behind the throne, a servant brought forth 2 objects: a ceremonial crown of Nexarian design and a medallion of human make. Both had been crafted from the same material, metal salvaged from the observatory where they had fought together. "Sarah Chen." Karen rose from her throne, her violet eyes intense. "The Empire recognizes you not as my master, but as my equal, a partner in preservation of peace, a bridge between our peoples, and a friend to the throne." The crown was placed on Sarah's head, lighter than it looked, perfectly sized for a human. The medallion was presented to Karen, who wore it alongside her own royal insignia. "Your Majesty," Sarah began, but Karen raised a hand. "Today, we set aside such formalities between us." The high sovereign scales rippled with what Sarah now knew was joy. "We have bulled together, fought together, changed together. Old laws bound us, but choice keeps us allied." What followed was unprecedented in Nexarian history. Karen descended from her throne and stood beside Sarah, facing their combined peoples. Human diplomats and officers mixed with Nexarian nobles, their previous animosity replaced by cautious optimism. Let all who witness this remember, Karen declared. Strength lies not in rigid adherence to the past, but in the courage to forge new futures. The bond between myself and Sarah Chen has shown us this truth. Sarah's voice joined hers, carrying clearly through the vast hall. Together, we choose alliance over enmity, understanding over fear, growth over stagnation. Not because we must, but because we will it. The ceremony concluded with a gesture that shocked the conservative nobles but drew approving murmurs from the younger generation. Karen and Sarah clasped hands in the human style, then pressed their foreheads together in the Nexarian tradition of equals. Later, in a quiet garden beneath artificial stars, they spoke privately. So, Sarah smiled. Does this mean you'll stop reminding me of the bond? Karen's scales shifted in amusement. The bond remains, Sarah Chen. But perhaps now we both understand its true purpose. Not to enforce peace, but to show us how to build it. And what comes next? Next, Karen looked out at the garden, where human plants now grew alongside Nexarian flora. Next, we continue what we began. There will be resistance, setbacks, challenges, but we face them as we have faced everything else. Together, Sarah finished. Indeed, Karen turned back to her, violet eyes gleaming. Though I warn you, if you ever try to actually give me orders, I may have to remind you why I ruled an empire before we met. Sarah laughed, a sound that would have been unthinkable in this place a year ago. I wouldn't dream of it. Partners. Partners, Karen agreed. In all things, now and forward. Above them, the artificial sky shimmered with stars. The same stars that had once divided their peoples, now binding them together. The bond that had begun as a diplomatic accident had become something more. A symbol of how change, trust, and understanding could transform enemies into allies, suspicion into strength, and ancient laws into new beginnings. The story of the human who owned an alien queen had become instead the story of how two leaders dared to imagine a different future and made it real.